Dear ladies, today we will start with the Victorian age after we have already finished the Romantic movement and the Romantic age in literature, or the romantic poetry. We have to know that the Victorian age, historically speaking, starts with the ascendance of Queen Victoria to the throne in 1837 in Britain, and it ends with her death in January 1901. This era was, of course, just like any other era, it has its own significance and it has its own paradoxes, especially when we think of politics in an encounter with religion, science, society, and any all other layers of life. This era was characterized by many paradoxes, and during this age it was just like an attempt to hold what was nearly exploding. This age was so much characterized by scientific developments and the appearance of Darwin's theory and the theory of evolution, which was standing in paradox with religion and the books of Genesis, as it is mentioned in Christianity in the Bible and in the in the Bible. Okay, so this age, although it was politically very stable, and the church was trying to take the hold of all the layers of life, and religion was a very cementic, let's say, basis for the life of the British people. Yet there were so many paradoxes in this age because of the scientific development, and during the Victorian age also there was a great development concerning the industrial revolution and the use of machinery. All these changes that happened during this age were standing against its political and religious stability. Uh, and of course, these circumstances and these characteristics were so much tended, or so much tended to make a great development on the part of literature. Um, for example, it led to the development of new genres in literature, and especially the development of the novel, because the novel was so much related to the people's lives, and to the it could encompass the changes happening in life, and that's why this genre started to see light and started to develop. And in fact, this development was not only in the novel; it was in all fictional genres of literature, like essay writing, like short story, and of course novella and the novel. Um, as we are studying poetry, we have to say that poetry also developed, and it was also affected by the upheavals and paradoxical changes happening during this Victorian age. After, sorry, ladies. After poetry was so much confined to imagination during the Romantic era, and during the characterizing the poetry of the Romantics, which was mainly based on imagination, on the love of nature, the love of beauty. Now, the Victorian poetry was so much down to earth, and it was so much discussing matters that are so much realistic. Yet, the Victorian poets did not give up the influence of the Romantics, and they did not skip the romantic flavor in their poetry, and they showed a great let's say they showed a great influence of the Romantics, and especially Byron and Keats. We would say, why Byron and Keats? Maybe it is because Byron's, let's say, rebellious nature, rebellious poetry, this rebellious characteristic in his poetry was also employed by many of the poets of the Victorian age. Also, Keats's sensational, uh, let's say, sensational basis of poetry was also employed in the Victorian age, in the poetry of the Victorian age. As far as we are concerned, we are going to discuss Tennyson's poetry. And in fact, we have to say that Tennyson's early poetry was derived from the emotional norms evolved by the second generation of the Romantics, as I said, especially from Shelley and Keats. Tennyson was so much interested in Shelley and Keats in making his poetry, and his poetry was known as the poetry of sensation more than poetry of reflection or thinking. This made his poetry more subjective than being objective, and that's why he was not very much hailed by his contemporaries. But later on, we have to know that he had a very close friend, and he was his immediate critic, Arthur Hallam, his long-lasting friend, and who had a great influence on his on Tennyson's poetry and Tennyson's discussion of matters. In fact, Hallam proposed that Tennyson's poetry would better express a decrease in the subjective power of his higher feelings to a more, say, objective. Sorry, ladies. And as I said, that Hallam proposed that Tennyson would better show a more realistic expression of the ordinary life. And in fact, Hallam wrote an essay on Tennyson's poetry, and this essay helped him so much in turning, Tennyson from idiosyncrasy, which means subjectivity, towards an alternative interest in the ordinary life and community. This matter, that turning from subjectivity to objectivity, helped so much to make a reputation for Tennyson as the most influential and admired poet of the Victorian age. If we go through his style, as I said, if we go through his style, we see that Tennyson exhibited a more extraordinary power of embodying himself in his characters' moods, and in the vivid, picturesque delineation of objects with a medium of strong emotion. He tried to pour part of himself into his characters and into his images that he uses in his poetry. In many of his poems, he deals with death-like states, and maybe it is because of the influence of his friend's hasty death, Arthur Hallam, while he was in Europe, and it was a great shock for Tennyson that he remained many years mourning his friend. And of course, the death of Arthur Hallam led Tennyson to draw his own way of writing poetry, and in fact he wrote a whole, let's say, an epic, just like an epic, for the death of his friend, and he wrote this epic is entitled In Memoriam. It was constituted of about 180 poems, and through this In Memoriam, Tennyson had gone through a journey ranging from faith to skepticism, and then he returns to faith. And in fact, he looked um, at death itself as a climatic and releasing experience. He did not look at death as something bad. In fact, he he tended to consider death as a relieving fact. In fact, after the death of his friend Hellam, Arthur Hellam, Tennyson retreated into a period of mourning, um, um, and he has gone through a purgative process, which was not only personal but also professional. As I said, it influenced even his writing. Now, in the poem under study, Ulysses, Tennyson uses a dramatic monologue, and he tended to use, as I said, the sensory imagery of Keats, or at least under the influence of Keats's rich color and languid movement of his Nightingale. They were of great influence on his poetry. In fact, as a Victorian poet, Tennyson was not only thematically Victorian, but he was also adventurous in his form. That's why he used an elaborate stanza in which he could swing the lines with the mood of the character or with the mood of the speaker, and that's why his poetry was very uh, was very lively. As I said, that since the Victorian age was an age of scientific development, um, in Ulysses, Tennyson tried to hail the importance of knowledge, and the importance of never giving up belief in knowledge, and getting more knowledge and more, let's say, um, um, uh, awareness of what is going around us.